Got a lot to get into with Marcus Hayes of the Philadelphia Daily News. He's joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. We're going to talk some Villanova, some Sixers, some Phillies, and more. Marcus joins us now. Marcus, how you doing on this Monday?
I'm great, Josh. How are you?
I'm doing well. So I got to start with Villanova because, I mean, to me, it's more than just 2 times the national championship in 3 years. It's more than just the job that Jay Wright has done over the years. To me, it's also the fact that I look at Jalen Brunson. This is a guy who, when he came to this program and the way he has bought in and his maturity and the way he has handled everything, it's almost like in some ways he turned to everybody else on this team in the last couple of years and said, watch me and follow me, and we're going to go places.
Yeah, Jalen's an excellent leader. He's kind of the perfect person for the perfect job right now, because they have a team where they have enough talent to play with anything. They're not a scrappy little underdog team. They're a very talented team, but they amplify that talent by playing precise basketball that fits their personnel perfectly. That's what makes them formidable. That's why they're the best team in the country right now. They're not the best team in the country because they have 2 NBA prospects this year and maybe a couple more coming up. They're the best team because they play the best way, and that's a credit to, first and foremost, Jay Wright, the head coach, but also Jalen Brunson, who sacrifices his own personal numbers, his accolades for the good of the team, but the accolades come anyway when you win. You know, he's the player of the year. He's pretty much the consensus player of the year. And you thought that it would have to be a guy like Trae Young from Oklahoma, or a flashier guy who is maybe a better NBA prospect. But you're right. Jalen Brunson has done for this team what probably a less talented player in Ryan Arcidiacono did for the team 2 years ago. He runs the team the way the coach wants the team run. I know it sounds simple, but it's true, and it's rare.
Also, it's rare that you get a guy like Brunson. You know, there was a lot of talk he was going to go not to Villanova. And for him and his type of pedigree, being the son of Rick Brunson, to come to Villanova and not just be a talented guy, but show that he has all these tools, that he's a well-rounded guard, that he plays defense, that he's got ice water in his veins. For him to come to Villanova and do what he's done, I think it says a lot about not just, Jay Wright. Everybody talks about coaches and their recruiting, but also give credit to the young man for saying, listen, I'm going to take classes in the summer and get my degree sooner. I'm going to stick with this program. I have a mission, and he has put in so much work to get as far as he has.
Well, his pedigree gives him a huge advantage on 2 different levels. Number one, it affords him access to basketball wisdom, not only from his father, but from coaches and players that his father was around, that his father took him to see, just the being in that environment, like Steph Curry with Del Curry. By the time Steph got to Davidson, there wasn't much basketball he didn't know, either through, camps and coaches and his dad and osmosis. So he's been in that situation since he can remember, Jalen, because of Rick, playing in the pros and being a coach. Number one. Number two, Jalen understands his limitations. Jalen is not, Steph Curry. Jalen is not John Wall. Jalen is not Kemba Walker. He's going to be a good pro. He's probably going to be a lot more like Jameer Nelson from St. Joseph's, in that he's not going to be as physically capable as a lot of NBA point guards. So the one and done route for him, or the 2 and through route for him, didn't make a whole lot of sense. I don't know that Jalen can be a better NBA player next year than this year, and he's on track to get his degree in 3 years. So because of his awareness of what he wasn't, I think that helped him amplify what he's become.
Marcus, looking at Villanova and Jay Wright, if Villanova wins this title, or even without the title, do you think some of the perception of him has changed in the last few years, especially since it was just a few years ago, people were wondering, should they fire him? Is he overrated? He can't get over the big game, get over the hump. How much has the last few years changed the perception of Jay Wright?
It's changed the perception a little bit by the fringe. The people who were calling for or who were questioning Jay Wright, and I remember at that point they were questioning a lot of people, a lot of the coaches in the Big Five or Six, and some of whom have since been removed. But the people who were questioning him were kind of the people who were questioning Brett Brown 2 months ago, 3 months ago. The people who always question, the people who rattle the bars just to rattle the bars. He was never really in any danger of being fired, but he did need to adjust. He had to decide what he was going to be and what his program was going to be. So what he stopped doing was pursuing NBA talent, either one and done or two and through talent. And he pursued sort of the next tier guy the guys who were interested in developing and interested in being coached. And I think he saw after his 2009, 2012 teams that it couldn't be the route for Villanova. He couldn't recruit against Kansas and Kentucky and North Carolina and Duke because he wasn't Kansas, Kentucky, North Carolina, or Duke. So what he did was he found the best players that wanted to come and learn how to play basketball. And that's really kind of the formula now. The best teams in the country, usually every year, are those teams. I don't think a team since Duke with Jahlil Okafor, I think it was 2014, maybe 2014, maybe 2015. They're the exception, not the rule now. So that's what Jay did, and that's why he's more respected now, certainly, than he was, 5 years ago, 6 years ago, and 12 years ago. When he came to Villanova, he was tasked with making Villanova great again, and that didn't happen right away.
We're talking with Marcus Hayes. You can follow him on Twitter at InkStainedWretch on Twitter. Marcus Hayes joining us on the Boardwalk Honda hotline here on 97.3 ESPN. You mentioned Brett Brown. Let's flip over to the Sixers for a bit. To me, when Joel Embiid went down, it wasn't always about Ben Simmons and Dario, because we know that those guys are there. It was about the rest of the team around those two guys stepping up. And what you've seen from Marco Bellinelli was a scoring punch off the bench. How Ersan is filled in more than admirably in the stead at the big man position. I think that this team is showing you that, yeah, they're way better with Joel Embiid, but this isn't the same team as last year. They have a lot more talent this year than last year, and I think the job that Brett Brown has done at putting all these guys in position around Ben Simmons has helped this team stay consistent even without Joel Embiid the last couple of games.
That's accurate. I mean, Brian Colangelo did a wonderful job of identifying the type of player that he needed to complete this team, whether or not Markelle Fultz returned. And yesterday, they got 38 points off the bench among the regular players. They got 42 total. But they got 38 points off the bench from the players that they needed it from. And that, 2 months ago, that was the only issue the Sixers had, really. They got no bench score. They had the best starting five and maybe the second or third worst bench as far as production goes. So, Brian Colangelo deserves a lot of credit. Certainly Brett Brown deserves a lot of credit for, using that talent correctly. But this is still a problem. I believe they've won one game without Joel Embiid, and that was a game against a team that, doesn't necessarily need to attack the rim all the time. And they got 4 block shots, 2 from Simmons, 1 from Amir Johnson, and 1 from Ersan Ilyasova. And as a team, they're consciously trying to protect the rim. But what Joel Embiid does defensively is he deters people from coming into the lane. And that means teams, when he's on the court and when he's alert and rotating, teams are reluctant to even attempt shots in the paint or inside the charge circle because he's so athletic and he doesn't foul. He's a lot like Olajuwon that way. So this is not a crisis that's over. This is a crisis that's probably building and will build for the next couple of weeks as teams adjust to what the Sixers have become and attack Amir Johnson and Rashawn Holmes. I know that's not what everybody wants to hear, but that's the reality. The Sixers are a mediocre defensive team with Joel Embiid. They're probably a poor defensive team without him. And he covers up a lot of deficiencies on the perimeter, namely, T.J. McConnell, Fultz now that he's back, Bellinelli. When he's in the game and those guys get blown by, those guys understand where to rotate because he's going to clean up their mess.
When you look at the Sixers heading down the stretch here, we know the Pistons game is going to be hard without Embiid. The Cavs game is going to be extremely difficult without Embiid. But there's still a strong possibility that this team is going to get to about 49 wins, considering their final stretch of games. To me, for them to make the playoffs, to me, that was always the next step. To me, making the playoffs is always a sign that, all right, you're moving in the right direction. I'm not as worried about, obviously, you want them to win a playoff series so they can continue to get that experience. But to me, just making the postseason is going to be so rich in experience for these young guys like Simmons and Dario and everybody to learn about. The NBA playoffs is a different speed, a different intensity, and they can learn from that and take that and be even better next season.
Well, absolutely. There's never a downside to any team in any sport making the playoffs. I know the tankers don't like to hear that, but that's the reality. I mean, the players that you have are more important than the players you're going to have if you have even one or two, relevant players. I believe we were talking about this last year, not at this point, but when Embiid, it might have been right after Embiid got hurt. I think they got hot, and
right.
Dario Saric is making his run, and people were like, "Oh, if we make the play, we're going to lose lottery balls, yada yada yada." No, you want your team to win when it can win. You never know what the next draft is going to bring. And it's ironic to me that Philadelphia is still sold on the Hinkie formula after seeing the Hinkie formula fail so catastrophically in the first 2 or 3 years with the picks. I mean, they got one guy out of 3, I think, in the early first round that they kept. And Dario was a drafting stash. So yeah, it's always kind of I'm a big believer in winning begets winning, and you should be able to scout to draft. And this team is complete at this point. You have, hopefully, if you're the Sixers, you have 3 pillars in Fultz, Simmons, and Embiid, and this is the time to build. And I almost feel bad for them because down the stretch, I guess they have Atlanta and Brooklyn and Dallas, which, I don't know what they are exactly. So
I don't think Dallas knows what they are either. So
yeah, they're not going to really be challenged down the stretch. And I don't think that helps them going into the playoffs. It doesn't give them the true sort of the pre-playoff experience. But you're right. It probably secures them a home court as a 4. And which is, again, the more you can get to the playoffs and experience success in the playoffs, the better it is. But the level of play and the level of intensity in the playoffs, for a team that turns the ball over, especially a team that turns the ball over like the Sixers and defends like the Sixers, it's going to be kind of eye-opening for most people who think that what happens in the regular season against Charlotte and the Knicks and the Hawks and the Nets is what happens in the postseason. They're 2 very different animals. And this is a team that really lives by the 3. I mean, you have to have Bellinelli, probably 2 of the 3, or 2 of the 4. Bellinelli, Ersan Ilyasova, Robert Covington, and J.J. Redick. They have to have hot 3-point shooting nights in order for this team to win with Embiid against even pretty good teams. And everybody in the playoffs is a pretty good or very good team, and they play especially perimeter defense much more effectively.
Marcus, you mentioned the draft picks in the Sam Hinkie era. I want to ask you this question because I had brought this up a couple weeks ago, and that is, you look at a team like the Wizards. They came out of the draft lottery with 3 players: Wall, Porter, and Beal. But those guys, they're only going to get so much better. They have a limited potential. Whereas the Sixers came out with Embiid and Simmons, and then We're still learning what Fultz is going to be. We got to give the kid a little bit of time to kind of come around. It's only 1 year, but to me, so much of this, isn't it also luck? Like, obviously part of it is talent evaluation, but isn't also some of it like you have to hit and you hope for the best? Because you look around the NBA, there's plenty of teams that have gone to the draft lottery and come out of there with nothing.
I think it's very little luck, except for injury. You know, injury is a luck kind of based thing, unless you incorporate work habits. Like, for example, I don't think that Jahlil Okafor would be where he is right now if he had come into the NBA in NBA shape and with NBA professional habits. I think he'd be a much better player. He'd have been able to learn more defensively and therefore be even a passable defender. But that's just who he is, and that's part of the scouting process, right? I mean, you have to know what you're getting. So I think a lot of it, the entire Hinkie theory, I understand it. You lose a lot of games and you get higher draft picks, and therefore the numbers, the likelihood you're going to get a stud increases. But the problem with that is there is no guarantee, and other teams routinely draft well or make transactions that, you know, benefit them and outdraft you. I mean, it's not an arguable issue. Steph Curry was a 7th pick. Klay Thompson was an 11th pick. You know, the argument ends for me at that point. It's just, I understand the theory, but I also understand that Nerlens Noel, Michael Carter-Williams, and Jahlil Okafor are catastrophes.
Marcus, let's switch over to the baseball, and I appreciate your time as always. I want to get your perspective on Kapler, because everyone's got to, some people are saying, he's a disaster, he's never going to get better. Other people are saying, this is what happens when you have an inexperienced manager. He needs time to develop. Where do you stand on Kapler? Do you think that he's going to learn to get better, or do you think what happened over the weekend, with the pulling Nola too early and, going to get, bring out Velasquez and Hobie Hillner was not ready? Do you think that Kapler can get better, or do you think this is a sign of things to come?
Well, certainly he can get better, and he's smart, and he's a learner. He's not stubborn, and he's not stupid, and those are two characteristics that are absolutely deadly for coaches or radio hosts or sports writers. You can't be stubborn and stupid. One of the things that we overlook about Gabe Kapler and don't appreciate about managing is Gabe Kapler's never been a manager or a coach. He's never been in the dugout when decisions have to be made. Number one. Number two, the thing that we underappreciate is being a manager happens fast sometimes. It's a slow game, but it happens fast. And when you're Gabe Kapler, when you're you or me sitting in the press box or sitting in a booth, we're concerned with maybe one or two things in that moment. Gabe Kapler, a manager, has to be concerned with 15 or 20 things every moment, which means there's only so much room for concern about the pitcher, or concern about the lineup, or concern about the defensive lineman, or concern about who's going to pinch hit in the 8th if I pinch hit this guy in the 7th, and you're still on defense right now. Your team's still in the field. So things happen very quickly. And hiring a manager who's never even been in a major league dugout as a coach is a huge risk, because experience counts. We as a press corps were astounded when Andy Reid made Doug Peterson the offensive coordinator. Then we were more in Kansas City. Then we were even more astounded when Doug Peterson became a head coach. And Doug Peterson has a lot more experience than Gabe Kapler. I mean, a lot more experience than Gabe Kapler, number one. Number two, Doug Peterson played a position where, Gabe Kapler wasn't a catcher. He was an outfielder. He wasn't even a shortstop. He was an outfielder. So he may have been running scenarios through his mind, but, catchers and middle infielders tend to be much more suitable as managers, because those are the positions that engage in the game, that are necessarily engage in every pre-pitch, every pitch, and they're responsible for the machinations of the game defensively. So he was a bad candidate from an experience standpoint. To answer your question, I think he will learn. And one of the hardest things for an unqualified person to do is to trust the more qualified people around him to help him. That's where he needs to improve. He needs to trust his coaches and defer to his coaches more than he has, I think, because I don't know anybody on that staff who would have managed the game the way that he managed it. And I think also those coaches might be biting their tongues a little bit, because not only is Gabe Kapler the manager, he's Matt Klentak's hand-picked brilliant manager, who is Andy McPhail's hand-picked wonder boy, who is John Middleton's hand-picked savior of the franchise. So if you're Dusty Wathan or if you're the bench coach, you're very careful about what you say to Gabe Kapler and how you say it, because it's going to get back not to, Gabe Kapler or Matt Klentak, the GM, or Andy McPhail, the president. It's going to get back to the owner. And that's toxic.
Mm-hmm. Marcus Hayes joining us here on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. Follow him on Twitter at InkstainedWretch on Twitter, Philadelphia Daily News sports columnist. Well, Marcus, we know one thing for sure. Today's Phillies-Mets game has been postponed due to snow. That's been rescheduled for July 9th. So Kapler has another day to listen to the media talk about him, right?
I don't think he does. I don't think he cares about that.
You think he tunes it all out?
No, I just don't think he's interested in it. Okay. He's interested in, nutrition, and he's interested in people, and he's interested in, health, mental health. And I'm not being facetious here. These are the things that he's interested in. He understands that, I'll put it to you this way. If Larry Boa were to read the stories about himself that Gabe Kapler generated this weekend, Larry would probably be going crazy and be angry and mad at himself and mad at whoever didn't tell Hobie Miller to warm up and, this, that, and the other thing. I think Gabe Kapler is past it. He's thinking about, he's thinking about Jake Arrieta. He's thinking about, the wind currents at Citibank Stadium. He doesn't dwell on past failures. He hopes to learn from them. And I think he's going to take this as a learning experience. And I don't think he really cares that much that he failed. What he cares about is how his failure will help him succeed next time. And I know that sounds like, pablum and drivel and motivated speaker speak, but that's really how he lives his life. I'm absolutely, totally convinced.
And because of that description, I have a visual of Gabe Kapler going for a run today with his Walkmans on his head, listening to a TED Talk.
Or sitting in a candlelit manager's office doing Pilates and yoga and, breathing, what do you call it, a diffuser with essential oil in it.
There you go. Marcus Hayes joining us on the Boardwalk Honda Hotline. What's that?
That's what you do. That's what you do in commercial breaks, isn't it?
I don't have candles or anything. I definitely don't have that. So, Marcus, I always appreciate the time as always, and you joining us here on 97.3 ESPN.
My pleasure, Josh. Have a good afternoon.